So welcome to what the Australians and New Zealanders would really like it if I called session 3. So if I start talking about afternoons and things, it's totally confusing for everybody. So I'm going to try and call this session 3 and the next one session 4. And James is going to wave at me and put up fingers and try and encourage me to do it. And if I keep forgetting, I'll kind of know because he'll probably be sitting there with his head in his hands. Okay. So we haven't been saluting the shrine, partly because I haven't been quite sure how to do it without just blocking it all out for you. So I'm going to do a sort of kneeling salutation and we can salute the shrine. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Dharmaya.
Namo Dharmaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Namah.
Namo Namah.
Om. Om.
Om.
Good, thank you. So you can probably see we've got the Buddha, and then there's an image of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara as expression of Bodhicitta and symbol of the order and the aspirations of the order, and Bhante. So in the last session, session 2, we were looking at refuge and looking at what is a refuge, and I answered 1 or 2 questions. We did a couple of periods of meditation. First one, just coming into our heart and metta and the 4 immeasurables, and then one at the end where we sat in the presence of the qualities of awakening and allowed those to, that influence, that blessing to stream into us. So I want to carry on now talking about refuge and talking about our relationship to the refuge. So we've seen that in the practice, we can allow those qualities to take whatever form is most helpful for us, whatever really connects us to the qualities of awakening. So it could be the whole refuge tree, it could be our yidam and so on. But there are different stances, views that we can take in relation to awakening, in relation to the refuge. And last week here, I know that Jnanavaccha and Maitreya Bandhu were doing a retreat, which 1 or 2 of you who are really keen, I know we're on, and some of you were even on the Kamalashila retreat the week before that. There's an embarrassment of riches at the moment. Yeah, and that retreat, those of you who were there will know much better than me because I didn't manage to participate at all, was on what Subhuti called in a 2003 presentation, 3 myths of the spiritual life. And myths it's a bit difficult calling things myths these days, because you look on the web and you read something, and down the bottom there are all those kind of bits of clickbait where it says 4 myths about electric vehicles, or 5 myths about home ownership, and so on. But Subhuti was using it in the sense of both a myth in the sort of archetypal sense, of something that you could really live within, but also he did mean it in the sense also of something which isn't finally true. It's just a way of looking at it. And that paper, sort of the paper that Subhuti gave 17 years ago now, it hasn't really kind of stayed much in circulation until recently. But I'm pleased that Jnanavacha and Maitreya Bandhu really have picked it up and run with it, because I think there's a lot that's very helpful in it. So for those of you who haven't come across those 3, they are sort of 3 approaches to Dharma life. And the first one is what Subhuti calls self-development in the paper. And that's where most of us start. Here am I, unenlightened, unawakened, and I want to become awakened in the way that the Buddha did and some of the other great realized practitioners down the centuries. So I will make the effort following the Dharma, using those methods, and I will transform myself and I will become awakened. And that's a good way to practice. And it's the way that is very much backed up by things like the quote in the Dhammapada. You yourself must strive. The Buddhas only point the way. Yeah? So we work. And that first meditation that we did in the last session, session 2, was basically us working with our own heart-mind. Yeah? We came into the body, we felt the breathing, we went to the heart center, and there we opened out to metta, and then with that metta we directed, so to speak, to other beings, or we included them in that metta. But it's as if we were the ones who were making the effort. We were the ones who were striving. And when I first started doing the Bodhichitta practice back in whenever it would have been, about mid-1970s, I did the original Tape Delam practice. And in that, there's no mention of a refuge tree or anything. It just starts with reflections about the suffering of beings. And then there's a little verse that I did 100,000 times. Beings who are one's own mothers wander in samsara, and with unbearable longing, we all produce the unbearable longing to become a Buddha. So you did that verse, and then you did Tonglen. So taking in the sufferings of the world and sending out whatever was needed. But there was no sort of reference to the Buddhas, other than in a sort of general sense that it was a practice within that tradition. So I certainly, at that stage of my development, it felt like I was doing it. Everyday me was doing the practice, which is so unsurprisingly at times I got rather depressed and overwhelmed by all this sort of shadow sort of being taken in, and I felt like I didn't have the resources. Somehow, how could everyday me take all that in? I felt overwhelmed at times. But still, that is a way to practice, and through Buddhist tradition, there is always that emphasis on virya, making the effort and a heroic effort. There's passages in the Mahayana Sutras where the Bodhisattva is represented as in a dense forest, sort of surrounded by difficulties, and there's a party of people that they're with, but they don't feel overwhelmed. They feel, well, I have the resources. I will help to lead all these beings out of this dangerous forest, and they do so. So there's that strong element of a kind of self-reliance that's there. However, that approach also, at a certain point, needs to sort of transcend itself, because there comes a point in your development where me trying to get enlightenment, which up to now has been really helpful, starts to become the problem, because it prevents that complete self-forgetting, which is what brings about the awakening, which brings about the ending of that selfing tendency, which brings about the ending of that sort of constant self-reference back to me and am I all right? And to start with, me and am I all right is all about, how am I going to live, and where's my work going to be, and so on. But for a long way down the path, there's still that sort of more subtle self-reference. Where have I got to on the path? Is this insight? Have I broken another fetter? All that, it's actually all still referring back to a created sense of a self at the center of experience. So at some point, that approach has to go beyond itself. It has to be transcended. So in the practice, as it's written down in the version that we're using, visualize the refuge, and Parami says, it's important that you call upon something beyond oneself before commencing the practice. But there's nothing explicit there about blessing or the influence of the refuges. So you could do it. You could do the practice still in a self-development way. So yes, the refuges are there, and they motivate you and they inspire you. And as it were, they sit there and cheer you on the path. But you're not necessarily interacting with them. You're not necessarily kind of drawing on direct influence on them. There, yes, still you're the one who's doing the striving. But then there's another approach, which Subhuti calls self-surrender, where we move from the emphasis being on by oneself must the effort be made, to opening to the influence, the spiritual power of the refuges. It's a more devotional approach. So we take up a different position in relation to the refuges. Now, rather than them being there and we're inspired and encouraged, now it's as if we're opening ourselves and almost trying to get out of the way and to allow those qualities of the refuges to come through us. It's almost like we're becoming a channel for all that love and compassion. So it comes from the refuges through us into the world. And again, this is very traditional approach. It's what we see Shantideva doing in the Bodhichitta. Great beings take possession of me. Out of devotion, I go into servitude. Right? So it's an opening of ourselves. It's an opening of that self-reference. The reference is now, the whole focus is on the refuges. And the more we're focused on the refuges and on the sufferings of beings, the more, as it were, transparent that sense of self is. Because, yeah, we're creating that sense of a self moment by moment by moment. But as we put the focus and the devotion and the love onto the refuges and the feeling for the suffering of beings onto beings, it's almost like there's just nothing much at all between them. There's just an open channel, and that spiritual power, that love, that compassion sort of flows through us into the world. So, as Subhuti calls this, self-surrender. So lay down the self. It's a bit like doing a full prostration in front of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Just, let the ego go really at half mast. So to do this, this isn't kind of a beginner's probably approach for most people, although all these approaches are valid. They can all be helpful at different times and at different phases in your spiritual life. Some will work better for certain kinds of spiritual temperament than others. So they're all good and valid, and also none of them are finally how it is. Yes, they are three myths of spiritual life, which means that we can move between them. Yeah? And at different times, perhaps even in one practice, you move between them. But to make this method work, we need to have enough trust and confidence that there is something beyond everyday me. When we first start practicing, so we start practicing sadhana, you feel like, well, I sit down, I imagine the blue sky. Now I visualize the yidam appearing. Yeah, there's Padmasambhava. Okay, there's the Vajra. Oh, right, I've forgotten the Katvanga. There's the Katvanga. And yeah, then I recite the mantra and I receive the blessings. And now I dissolve him away. And it's all still very intra-egoic. Yeah, it's still within that sort of ego sense. So at that stage, if you start saying, well, okay, I'm going to practice self-surrender, it will have an effect, but you'll probably also tend to feel like, well, if I don't make an effort, nothing happens. So you think, all right, well, I'll stop making an effort. Go on, you do it. You do it. I'm waiting. And then after a bit, it feels like nothing happens. So you think, all right, I'll do it then. So as you go deeper into the practice, yes, one or two little smiles of recognition. As you go deeper into the practice, you start feeling like, oh yes, there is something that I'm in contact with through the practice. Yeah, that you start to have greater trust and confidence. And then this way of practicing really sort of comes into its own. As I say, some people it may work from the beginning. You're just that kind of person, and that's great. But by and large, you may find that it's when you get a bit deeper into the practice that this really opens out for you. So then we're just open to the refuges. And at that point, the practice starts to get very easy because we're not doing anything. Yeah? We've just set things up so that, all we have to do is be open to the refuges. And then those qualities start to flow through.
Nagarakshita would like to know what the third myth is.
She would, yeah. A few of you who've been listening to this and don't know probably want to know what the third myth is. So we've only got through the first two. So Nagarakshitara is ahead of the game by about a minute, I think. Okay. Hi there. All right, so then there's a third possibility. And so these first two are both locating the refuge outside somewhere. Yeah. So in the first, the self-development one, the refuge is outside, it's inspiring us, it's motivating us, and we're making the effort to follow the path to get to where the refuge is. In the second one, that source of qualities and value and richness is out there, and we're opening to it. But then you can also take the approach that those qualities are not out there, but they're in here. Part of the reason why these are three myths is because that whole out there in here thing is a kind of filter that we're putting on reality. Yeah, it's another conceptual layer of things. So, which means we can move between them, knowing that none of them are quite right. So in the third approach, which Subhuti calls self-discovery, we start to locate those qualities within. And it may not seem like everyday me doesn't seem to have those qualities particularly, but we become more and more aware of, through practice, of the depths of mind, the richness of mind. At times, things emerge within us. We find ourselves spontaneously acting in certain ways, or we start finding these qualities within us. We feel like, oh, maybe I've been projecting them onto someone out there, or onto some Padmasambhava over in the Western Paradise, or wherever he is, sort of over there somewhere. Now, maybe, could it really be that these qualities are all qualities of my own mind? Not that it's my and not that it's own, but could they really be within? Yeah. So then we look within. And we may get to the point where we start to realize that these qualities are natural, in the sense that when we stop, when we learn to relax that selfing tendency, when we manage to create gradually bigger and bigger gaps in the ongoing saga of me, and there's self-forgetting, then mind relaxes, and when mind relaxes, good things happen. When mind really relaxes, great things happen. So we start to build a relationship with those qualities, locating them within. And the approach is more like, it's not so much I'm a lotus trying to grow into the sunlight. It's more like, yes, there's some dust on my eyes and I can't quite see, and I need to just clear it away. So the practice is about clearing away adventitious defilements. Adventitious means not inherent to they're not inherent in mind, so they can be cleared away. So in this approach, those qualities are there, and when mind relaxes, they appear. The difficulty is that mind has lost track of its own nature. it's become identified with these 5 skandhas and thinks, oh, that's what I am. And because of that, it's always creating tension within itself. Because I've always got to make sure that I'm all right and the body's all right and what will happen to me, and I don't want that to happen, and oh, you know, I really want this to happen. So all that is constantly creating tension within mind. So as that self-referencing dies down, and as mind starts to get glimpses of its own nature, then we discover what's really there. Yeah, so it's a self-discovery approach. Yeah, so pretty traditionally, mind's qualities are veiled by the 2 veils of klesha and nyaya, you know, negative emotions and wrong views about how it is. Yeah, and because of that, we produce these selfing tendencies, and they prevent love, compassion, generosity, and so on from kind of pouring out of us. So, in terms of bodhicitta practice, a way that's more aligned with this myth would be to have the refuge, the qualities of awakening actually in your heart center. It would sort of bring the qualities back home in that way, seeing it within this approach. So it starts to locate all that richness within rather than put onto the refuges without. So as I say, none of these are how things are. But they can all be useful, helpful under different circumstances. And over time, it's probably good to explore them all. And it's also really good to see that they are all different emphases in terms of valid ways of going for refuge. Because quite a lot of the sort of debate that happens within the order, particularly some of the more heated debate, tends to be proponents of one or another of these myths, kind of arguing with proponents of one of the other ones. So you can have people more sort of taking their stand on the Dhammapada, by you must strive yourself. Buddha's only point the way. So all these archetypal figures and so on. Do we need them? What have they got to do with Buddhism? Blah, blah, blah. You can take any of those 3 and decide that that's the approach. And you can take all sorts of quotes out of Bhante and decide that that was his approach too. But when you look through his teaching, well, you'll actually find all 3 in all sorts of ways. So yes, I hope that what Subhuti's done, and Subhuti says he feels that paper is one of the best things he ever did. He was telling me last week. And what other people are now picking up on, will allow us to have a sense of different ways of going for refuge and a breadth and richness without having to kind of champion, one myth against the others. Because if we really have the sense that none of them are quite how it is, that puts it all into perspective to start with. And also we may be able to get a sense of the full richness of Bhante's teaching, because Bhante's, he was always very aware of the relative nature of all these kind of different views of reality. He never seemed to get lost, and can kind of get confused, views about reality for reality itself. He was just stood too clearly on direct experience to do that. Okay, how long have I been rattling on for? That's probably long enough. Yeah, I think that will do. So, if you have questions, unless there's anything immediate that anyone just has to unmute and say, unless you really want to quickly put something in the chat, in which case, if I can answer it fairly quickly, I will.
Padmajata wants to let people know that if they type in Subhuti 3 myths of spiritual life into Google, they'll find Subhuti's article.
The wonders of Google, thank you. Good. Yeah, it's well worth a read. Okay. So over the course of these few days, we'll be exploring the Bodhicitta practice from those different viewpoints. As I say, in that last session, we kind of came more from a self-development viewpoint with the meditation, and then more of a self-surrender one. And yeah, I think this evening we'll go through a whole Bodhicitta practice. What the heck? And yeah, I'll find we'll take one of those approaches through it. There should be time to do the whole practice a few times on the retreat, and then we can come at it from different angles. Feel into what we respond to, what works for us, how it works, how it doesn't work. Okay. So, meditation. So to start with, no need to do anything. Just aware experience. Now letting awareness and energy flow down through the body, down to the earth. It feels right. You could feel or imagine breathing up energy from the earth so that we become more and more stable, more and more grounded. Breathe it up into that area just below the navel. Like a tree taking in nourishment from its roots. Letting the upper body be open and free as much as possible. Slight lifting in the top of the head. Becoming aware of the body, sensations. How is it now? Aware of the sensations and feelings, the energy movements. Letting that awareness have kindness, as it were, woven through it, inseparable from it. Becoming aware of the breathing and the sensations that let us know we're breathing. focusing on the out breath. And with that, relaxing into a sense of spaciousness. Breathing out into space. And sensing that we're breathing out into a space which has no limits. Becoming aware that we're in the midst of a great blue sky. Always available. Blue sky is endless. Rich and warm. Serene and peaceful. Now out of the sky in front of us appears the refuge. So it can be the whole refuge tree, could be the Buddha, some Buddha or Bodhisattva figure or other Yidam figure. Having a sense of being in the presence of complete freedom, complete clarity about how things are. Great love, great compassion. Now we focus on our in-breath. And with each in-breath, it's a sense of taking in those qualities, receiving those qualities, opening to them. Just as yesterday we did a meditation when we breathed in, letting life right in. So we let the refuge, the love, the freedom, the knowing, the compassion right in, into our being. During the out-breath, there's just a sense of those qualities pervading body and mind. And then with the in-breath, open more and more, receive more and more. Filled to overflowing with the qualities. And so now, as we continue to receive with each in-breath, on the out-breath, there's a sharing. All that love and freedom and knowing and compassion going out to others. You can hold particular people or situations in mind, or just have a sense of them going out to the world. So all we have to do is stay open, receptive on the in-breath, and not hold back on the out-breath. Allow that flow of life, that flow of energy that flow of qualities to go out. It's as if the process happens all by itself. Qualities flowing in, being shared, as natural as breathing. Now, when we're ready, can allow the refuge to dissolve away. Doesn't really go anywhere. It's always available. This vast blue sky. And we let that too gently fade away. And once again, just aware experience. So that was following self-surrender approach to the practice. So combined with a form of Tonglen, giving and receiving. Okay, let's leave it there for this afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are. And I'll see some of you for session 4 in 2 hours' time. And in that session, we'll go through the Bodhicitta practice in one way or another. Okay, see you there.